Um, Welcome to the August 4th Woodbridge Board of Education special meeting. 7:01, I will call the meeting to order. Thank you all for making arrangements to, however you did it, to be here tonight. I know for some of you it was a bit of a challenge.
Lynn, you muted by accident. You got to unmute.
Right, where did you leave off? Thank you all for being here tonight, if you didn't hear that. I know some of you have gone to extreme circumstances because you don't have power and you don't have internet service. So I thank you for the efforts that you have made in being able to get online tonight for this special meeting. The first item on the agenda is to appoint the interim superintendent. So I will move that we appoint Christine Syriac as interim superintendent effective August 10, 2020 at a per diem rate of $800 per day. Do I have a second?
I'll second. Jeffrey Townsend seconds.
Jeffrey Townsend seconded, Marcia. So all those in favor, you know what? I'll go through our roll just to make sure so that so Marcia gets all of this. Jeff Townsend?
Yes.
We're voting, yes. Megan Genovese?
Yes.
Jeff Hughes?
Yes.
Thanks, Megan. Dan Cowan?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Joyce Shavers? You're muted, Joyce.
Yes.
Joyce is saying yes in my living room. And Lynn Piascyk, yes. So it's unanimous that we have voted to appoint Christine Syriac as our interim superintendent.
Thank you.
So Christine is with us tonight. And Christine, perhaps you would like to say a few words, if that's possible.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope that everyone's able to hear me. I'd like to thank the Board of Education for selecting me. The opportunity to lead Woodbridge through the upcoming transition in leadership, as well as at a time when districts are in the process of reopening their schools, is greatly appreciated. I look forward to working with the members of the community, the board, the staff, and the parents on behalf of the children of Woodbridge. The interim position comes with great responsibility. We're entering into new territory in education. It is a time that by working together and by combining our varied experiences, our areas of expertise and knowledge, we can demonstrate that through listening and guidance and through hard work, we have the capacity to grow even stronger. I want to assure you that I will work well day by day for the students of Woodbridge, for all of the staff, and for all of the community. I share my gratitude with the Board of Education, who made it possible for me to accept this new challenge in my career. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christine. We're happy to have you on board, and we look forward to working with you as well. And I think Christine's planning on staying online for the rest of our meeting so that she can start her the process of getting up to speed with all of the things that are happening in our district. So we're happy to have you for that.
Thank you.
Item number 3 on the agenda is to modify Superintendent Gilbert's retirement date. I'll move that the effective retirement date of Superintendent Robert Gilbert be changed to August 31st, 2020. Do I have a second?
Dan Cowan will second that.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, so I'm going to call the roll for you to vote. Dan Cowan,
Yes.
Joyce Shavers,
Yes.
Megan Genovese,
Yes.
Jeffrey Townsend,
Yes.
David Ross,
Yes.
Jeff Hughes.
Yes.
Who did I miss? Some board member oh, me, yes. Sorry, Bob. So that is unanimous as well. We're on to agenda item 4, accept policies for 30-day review.
I make a motion that we move this to the next scheduled meeting, given the situation with the internet that we have right now. I'd like to have some argument, and I'm unsure if I'll be able to share my screen and make the argument that I need.
So we have a motion to table the acceptance of policies for 30-day review. Do I have a second? I'll second.
Is it all of the policies, or is there any one particular policy in a provision that you want to discuss further?
So it's all the policies that I wish to discuss further. A lot of the comments and arguments are unified across them. And so I think that, it's, given the current situation, it's better just to postpone them until the next meeting so that I can show the screen that I need to show and make the argument. So it is all of this.
So the concern is that we want to get these policies in effect before school starts. Go ahead, Lynn, sorry.
Okay, so I'm going to second the motion so that we can have a discussion. Okay, so the motion has been seconded. Go ahead, Megan. Discussion.
Thanks, Lynn.
On the motion.
Yeah, so I guess just the concern is that since it's directly related to issues with COVID-19, the policies are regarding masks for students and staff and self-quarantine, and also, permitting the superintendent to have power to make decisions as needed in emergency situations. So all of them are very important to get through before school begins. And once we approve that they sit for 30 days, they have to sit for 30 days before their policies. So I guess that's something to think about.
So the first point that I'd like to make in regards to these policies is that all of these policies are moot, given the fact that by executive order, all the specifications in them are a requirement by the governor's executive order. So we really don't need these policies. I also believe that these are not things we should be making policies of. These are things that should be in our rule book and in our handbook. Policy, like you say, has very specific guidelines around it when we can activate, deactivate them. And so I think that it's important that we don't make policies. 30 days ago, we were washing our food as it was coming into our house. We know now that, washing your food as it comes into your house is not a practical, necessary thing to be doing. So I think that these things that we are discussing in all of these policies are things that should be handled at a rule level, not a policy level. So that is my first argument against what you pose there.
Any other discussion on the motion to table the acceptance of policies for 30-day review until the August 17th meeting?
I don't know, Bob, I hate to call you. I know that you've been in contact back and forth. I know you guys even had to over the weekend, basically revise a policy because the rules had changed, the laws had changed, or the executive order had changed. So I don't know. I'm just curious if you have anything to add to what I had already said. Maybe you don't have anything to add, but just that the concept behind why this is important to have as a policy versus just a statement of school. And again, some of this is, you're right, Dan, in that this is temporary potentially. It's not necessarily, and hopefully not long term, but it is for the time being.
So Bob, do you have any comments to make on that?
I mean, I think we're arguing the policies right now versus we're arguing the merit of the policy, not necessarily whether or not we should, or maybe we're not. I'll retract that, sorry.
I think right now we're talking about whether or not the acceptance of the policies for 30-day review should be tabled until the August 17th meeting. That was the motion, I think,
Yeah,
Dan.
And I guess what I'm saying is that there's nothing that prohibits us from using these policies as guidance for rules inside the school for an opening of school. We have the executive orders as an enforcement mechanism, and these can be our guidance for how we're going to open the school. But there are fundamental flaws, especially in the self-quarantine policy, that need to be flushed out. These were boilerplate policies given to us by CABE, and I raised during our policy committee meeting some real concerns with them and some hardships that they will cause for a large portion of parents and our staff for Beecher Road. And we don't know, and also these policies. So I'll stop there because what we're discussing right now is whether or not we need to vote on these policies. And I think that because we have the executive order, because we can use these as guidance to open the school, and they don't have to be ratified to guide our actions, I voice again that we don't need to vote to accept these policies for review. They should be sent back to committee and revised before they're accepted.
Bob, do you have some information you can share with us? Anything?
I think I'm going to be fairly redundant in terms of what's been said by a few of you already. So yes, there's executive orders that certainly basically dictate and mandate much of this information. I do believe that the board in taking these up and actually acting upon them is also affirming them as important. So I think that lends a level of affirmation, and parents see that as being something that is more official from that standpoint. They certainly can still be addressed. One of the policies has us needing to send the information out to staff. We can't really send the policy out to staff if it's not really been endorsed by the board. Also, one of the policies is one that is really important for the temporary actions that the superintendent may need to take during this very, very changing and fast-moving time of the pandemic and the reopening of schools. So I do understand that there's many opinions about these, but I do think that they're certainly important. These are the ones that were the most important that CABE suggested that we take upon ourselves to look at.
Maybe I just speak very quickly to that, which is that I was the other member of the policy subcommittee that went over these. And I'll just point out that although there is some overlap a considerable amount of overlap between the executive order and these policies, the subcommittee spent some time thinking very carefully about some of the changes that we wanted to make to them to reflect to what we understood to be the best practices to be operative. And some substantive changes were made, such as the number of hours prior to entry to Connecticut that someone might get a test, et cetera. So there are substantive changes that do not can coincide with exactly what the executive says. So there's not really a moot point between them. I think we've adopted them in a way, or adapted them in a way that that actually suits our community very well.
So after we reviewed them as the policy subcommittee, they were then again changed, and I did not have a chance to review them. I apologize. But normally our procedure is that the policy subcommittee reviews them before they're submitted to the board. So that is yet another reason why we probably should kick them back down. I do want to extract something out and say that policy 5114.81, which is the superintendent's ability to suspend a policy, I would have no problem forwarding that one through if we could table the other 4 for further review and discussion.
I believe that policy, Dan, is 6114.81 is emergency suspension of policy during pandemic. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry if I cited the wrong number. 6114.
It's okay. Okay, so now, Dan, do you want to amend your motion to only table the mask policy and the self-quarantine policy? Or do you want to leave your motion as it was to table all the motions?
So I will amend my motion to conclude just the mask and the self-quarantining, and I will not extract out the emergency suspension one. And I think I would like to add to it, because I think that these policies are so important and that they need to be right, that I think we should wait.
Okay, so I'll second that motion, and now is there any other discussion about tabling the policies for masks, both staff and students, and self-quarantine staff and students? Any other discussion? Megan?
I have one more thought, and I'm realizing I should know the answer to this probably, but I don't. So I'm posing it, and I have a feeling Marcia might be our person to go to here. But if we agree to put these on the table for 30 days, but there's still the opportunity to make changes in that time, if we make changes during that time, do they then have to be put on the table again for 30 days? Or is it okay to change them in that 30-day time frame? If everyone's okay with it, then it still goes through in 30 days.
You would need to actually resubmit them for 30-day review if they've been changed within content.
Okay. Thank you, Marcia. I appreciate that.
Any other comment on the motion?
So just to follow that up, though, to say if that still gives us the 30 days, if we approve it, go on for 30 days, that still gives us time to review them and talk about if there needs to be changes. And if no decisions are make changes, then it will be okay to go through 30 days from now. If changes are made to whatever policies, then obviously we have to review.
So if we're not going to table them, I'm going to ask for changes to be made tonight before I can vote in the affirmative for them. And I don't know the practicality of that.
Right.
All right. Any other discussion on tabling the policies for masks, staff and students, self-quarantine, staff and students? Any other discussion before the vote? Okay, I'll call the roll. For tabling policies, masks, staff and students, self-quarantine, staff and students. Megan?
No.
Dan?
Yes.
Jeff Townsend?
No.
David Ross?
No.
Jeff Hughes?
No.
Joyce Shavers?
No.
And I will vote no, so that motion doesn't pass. So now we will look at policy 4118.237, masks for staff. Any discussion?
So the reason I objected to these policies is that there is no termination on these policies inside the policy. So I think that we should include something in here that is a mechanism that allows them to be sunset. I first recommend that we tie the policy to the CDC website, and it is the National Center. Oh, here. Maybe can I share my screen? Let me see if I can share my screen. 1 second. WebEx. There it is. Share content. Google Chrome. Is my screen?
Yes. We can see it.
Screen viewable right now of website that refers to pneumonia, influenza, mortality, and they've now added COVID-19 into these calculations. And so what it shows is that historically we have used 10% greater mortality than the baseline to define what a pandemic is. And as you can see on the far right-hand side of the graph here, you can see that COVID has been a extremely dangerous and deadly disease, and I do not disagree with that at all. However, I think we need to have some metric that is objective and measurable that sunsets this policy. So I first recommend that we use this metric as the sunset for this policy, and that when we go below the pandemic threshold, that this policy gets paused, and if we go above the threshold, the policy automatically comes back online. That change was added, then I could vote in the affirmative for moving the mask policy forward.
In principle, I could be supportive of a data-based decision that sunsets a policy based on some sort of medical data, but I'm not sure that this is the right one. It could be. I would defer to someone who has expertise in the area.
Is our nurse supervisor on any chance?
Unfortunately, she is unable to log on due to the circumstances we have right now, so she's not able to get on. Neither is our medical advisor, unfortunately, tonight.
Yeah, I would recommend the professor of epidemiology. That would be my vote for the person to interpret epidemiological data.
Well, I would also state that that person's also a Board of Ed member, you know, and so I respect his opinion, but I think that, you know, we have individuals that are our consultants and advisors for this as well. So I would love to hear what Dr. Townsend would say, but I also would like to preface it with that.
I guess what I would just say is that I understand your concern, Dan, and I think it's something for us to think about. In my opinion, epidemiologically, this is not something that we have to worry about on the short term because this is a pandemic that's likely to last for quite some time. And so I don't think it's an issue there. I think that your concern, though, is a real one. And what we should think about is going forward, maybe we should spend some time, either, I'd be happy to do it, or I have plenty of expert colleagues that I could bring on if it would make sense to do so, to come up with a criterion that we think would be a suitable one for the sunset of this policy. But I'm not at all concerned that the starting this policy now will be a problem before we can come up with a decent decision about when to sunset it. So my personal opinion is that we have a lot of things to do right now. And I think I'd like to get this policy through so that we can start acting on this in response to the policy as soon as possible. And then I would very respectfully agree that we should think about how the policy should be sunsetted in the policy committee and come up with a viable future plan for how that should happen.
So as an alternative to a objective measurement, I ask, and I could, if we could insert the language that says that this policy will be under review as an agenda item at every normal Board of Ed meeting, and that we have to reaffirm it until such time that we have a different metric then. That allows us to, because it is policies and they're distinct, and if we easily, it could just be one of the consent agenda items that we are renewing the policy. And that would allow us an automatic disconnect from the policy without a 30-day review afterwards.
I have a question. I don't know, Bob, if you can answer it or if Marcia can answer it. If the executive order is lifted by the governor, does this policy still stay in effect?
So I think what would happen at that point is we're in very close communication with Quinnipiac Valley Health District and the medical director there. And we would obviously not just pay attention to the executive order being lifted, because there may be still the option of using the masks, even though it may not be a requirement anymore. So we would work very carefully with the local health district to make that decision. And I think we would want to also look at that from a perspective of the local health data in the community, and certainly have a board conversation about that, before that took place. But I think those are the kinds of pieces of information that we would want to have a check and balance on before we did anything.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion on this policy? Dan, are you speaking about both the policy for staff and students, or are you just looking at the staff policy right now?
All my comments related to both staff and student policy for mask wearing. I haven't brought up my concern for self-quarantine.
Okay, so is there anyone else who has any comments about masks, policy for staff or policy for students? Any discussion, Megan?
The only thing I just wanted to bring up, and Dan, that you do bring up a good point. It's certainly something we want to have flexibility with when that time comes. But I think you said it very well. There's a lot that needs to happen right now. And in this moment, we just need to move forward with this, not worry about when it closes down so much. But obviously we do want to make sure we have that capacity, which we always do. But the last paragraph, it's on like the last page that has stuff. I mean, it says, until further notice, the board will require the wearing of masks as described in this policy. The board reserves the right to interpret the provisions of the policy and to modify any or all matters contained in the policy at any time to applicable law. So I feel like it kind of captures what you're saying. I know it's not like solidifying it with a data point that we'll reference it to, but it leaves it clarifies that this might change, as needed.
I would say that is probably on every policy that we have, right? That's the legalese that allows us to readdress all policy. So all I was asking was for that to be expanded upon in one of the two ways I recommended. I can concede that, my first recommendation of the graph may not be the best one. So that's why I asked for the time-based one until such time that Dr. Townsend and their supervisor and our medical consultant could arrive at something that's objective, that is a better one, and it just prevents it from falling off the radar. Because this is like I said, I believe this policy is very, very important, and what I don't want to do is get into a habit of just ignoring policy and willy-nilly activating it and deactivating it arbitrarily, because I think that is a bad habit to form. Policy should be followed. We should limit the amount of policy we have so that we follow all the ones that we do.
Oh, it's only Woodbridge. Oh, I see.
Okay.
You may want to, okay.
If you're not speaking, can you mute yourself, please? Thank you. All right. Do we have a motion for policy mask staff and mask students? A motion for that? Does anyone have a motion they want to make?
I mean, I would like to make a motion to the policies for 30-day review. Should we go one or two at a time then? If we're
okay, so
I'll
See,
second
I'm
that.
sorry. So I think, I'm just going to repeat, and if I'm wrong, for Marcia's sake, and if I'm wrong, Megan or Jeff, you can correct me. I believe, Marcia, that Megan Genovese made a motion to accept policy 4118.237, masks for staff, and 5141.8, masks for students, for 30-day review. And I believe Jeffrey Townsend seconded that. And I think I got a thumbs up from Jeff. And Megan, I think, is okay with that as well. All right, so that is the motion. And now we will take the vote. Megan?
Yes.
Dan?
No.
Jeff Townsend?
Yes.
David Ross?
Yes.
Jeff Hughes?
Yes.
Joyce Shavers?
Yes.
And Lynn Piascyk? Yes. Motion passes to accept those two policies on masks, staff and students for 30-day review. Next on the agenda is self-quarantine, staff and students. Is there any discussion?
So I would make the same argument, and I'll make it very quickly. There is no sunset date on this. I think it should be tied to a metric. The other part of this is that this policy is overburdensome beyond our state executive orders. The executive orders carve out exceptions for essential workers who travel outside the state. I will give you a distinct example. I myself often have to travel around New England. I have a Rhode Island office right now. The Rhode Island is a must quarantine state. So as an essential worker, I can travel to Rhode Island to a old age home, enter a boiler room, inspect the piping, make my recommendations as the engineer, and then return to my home and not have to self quarantine. This policy would make my daughter have to leave the school if enacted in its current state. It is an undue burden to put this on the parents, and I also think it's a detriment to the children of this town to have such an arduous policy. I understand the safety implications of wanting people, but I think that we need the flexibility to evaluate if there's actually a risk. And having a policy like this on the books ties our hands in a way that makes it impossible to evaluate that risk.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Any other comments or discussion on the self-quarantine policies for staff and students? Okay, hearing none, we need a motion.
So I motion that we push this back down to the policy committee so it can be reviewed again, given the facts that I just stated.
Okay. Do I have a second on that motion? Hearing no second. Do I have another motion?
Can I? Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I was just going to make the motion, if someone else is finished with the motion, that we go ahead and put this forward for review.
I'll second that.
All right, so Marcia, Jeff Townsend made a motion to accept policy 4118.238, self-quarantine staff, and 5141.81, self-quarantine students for 30-day review. Megan Genovese seconded it. Is that correct, Jeff? Okay. All those in favor?
Discuss quick first, Lynn, though. I just don't want to discount what Dan just said, because I think what he said is very important. We do want to make sure that we are protecting families and students in all ways possible and being as mindful as we can, which is part of why this policy was created, was to protect people coming to school. So I certainly don't want to discount what you're saying, Dan. I do think that it's important that we get forward with this, because it's important to protect as many students and teachers as possible. But I'm absolutely open to discuss this policy sooner than later, because it's not just a sunset issue. It is a concern about how to not exclude children based on what the parent might need for work. So I think that is an important issue, and I'm certainly open to discussing this further in the next week or so if we need to. Worst case scenario, then we have to put it back for 30-day review. But I do think that it's an important issue that you brought up. But again, I do think it needs to get pushed forward, and we can tweak it if we need to.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion on the motion? Okay. Megan?
Yes.
I'll call the roll. I didn't hear your vote, Megan. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, I said yes.
Thank you. Jeff Townsend?
Yes.
Dan Cowan?
No.
Jeff Hughes?
Yes.
David Ross?
Yes.
Joyce Shavers?
Yes.
Lynn Piascyk, yes. Motion passes. Last policy we're going to look at is 6114.81, emergency suspension of policy during pandemic. Is there any discussion on that policy?
I make a motion to put it on for 30-day review.
I'll second that.
Okay, Marcia, Dan Cowan made a motion to accept policy number 6114.81, emergency suspension of policy during pandemic for 30-day review, seconded by Megan Genovese. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, we'll call the roll. Megan?
Yes.
Dan Cowan?
Yes.
David Ross?
Yes.
Jeff Hughes?
Yes.
Jeff Townsend?
Yes.
Joyce Shavers?
Yes.
Lynn Piascyk, yes, unanimous, motion passes. Thank you all. We're moving on to agenda item number 5, receive update on reopening plan and remote learning. Bob, you're up.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you, everybody, and congratulations, Christine. And good to see you on the screen. Thank you, board, for your motions tonight. Appreciate that very much. Before I give the reopening plan summary update and joined by Lisa in a few moments, I want to just bring the school community up to date on another item, which I think is very important. Board members were alerted and staff members too, but I want you to know that our dear friend Bill Lech, who's our band director, suffered a very serious situation a week or so ago. Bill, who's our band, I did talk to his wife multiple times, and I visited Bill, and I have their permission to share this. Bill, our band teacher, suffered a stroke a week and a half ago. And as you know, strokes are nothing, they're very serious. I mean, they're just very serious. And I visited Bill in the hospital this past weekend. And Bill, as you know, Bill, he's got that wonderful smiling face, and actually had that smiling face in the hospital. But he's, he's gone through a tough time, and his wife is very encouraged, and I am too, in terms of his progress already over the past week and a half. I spoke to her again today. But I want to let the school community know that, because I know that Bill touches the lives of many of our students, many of our adults for that matter. And Bill is rehabbing at this point. And his wife and I talked a little bit about how people could reach out. And I think the best way to reach out right now that works for them and their family is to, if you want to send a card or something like that, send it to the school. And we will make sure that those cards and expressions get to Bill and his family as soon as possible. So thank you for that. And our thoughts and prayers are with Bill and his family at this time.
Thanks for that update, Bob.
I think we're going to have the presentation that you have put on the screen at this point. So when that gets on there, I'll get started. So I do want to say that I am very, very, very appreciative of the collaborative work that is going on in our school community right now. It is truly amazing to see what our teacher assistants are doing, our teachers, our administrators, other members of our staff, our parents, collaborating together, working on the various details of our reopening plan and getting into really the specifics and the parts that really make it work. The collaboration is really great, and I want to thank everybody who's been participating in that. We could not do it without all of you. That's for sure. There's been great progress in many areas. There'll be an opportunity to hear from a few of our leaders, those who are able to get on the meeting in a little right now. We'll hear from them in a few moments. But the work is extremely deep in terms of the details. The challenges are enormous. I think you know that. We're working through it. I can tell you that I'm hoping everybody in the Beecher community is safe from the storm that hit us on Tuesday. And I know people are without power and in situations that they weren't expecting. I can tell you that this storm has definitely put our efforts back a few days. It's hard for us to even communicate with each other in terms of, in some situations, to get the work done. So it's become even more challenging for us. But we're pushing forward and we're moving on, and we're ready to give you this summary today. This is a high level summary, really, of what you've heard already, plus more of a focus on the remote learning plan that Lisa will do. I do want to say, from the board's perspective, if you can help me in this particular way, I would ask that you would hold all your questions to the very end of the presentation, because we are taping this presentation tonight, and our goal, if our technology and the people who are doing the technology are able to work this out based upon the limitations, it's our goal to send the clip of this part of the meeting with this presentation to our parents. It's another way of helping them to understand the details, so they are able to provide us their decision for their child, which we're going to be asking from them over the weekend. So if you can hold your questions to the end, that would be very much appreciated. So as we move forward here, I just wanted to, the first slide is really just nothing new. The Connecticut's Guiding Principles for Reopening, which is geared again towards returning all students full-time, safeguarding health monitoring, emphasizing equity, fostering communication, and factoring in the decisions that help with safety, social, emotional well-being, and mental health. As you know, every district was called to provide and come up with 3 different plans: a in-person learning plan with a remote learning option, also a hybrid learning plan, which the remote learning option continues, and then a remote learning plan for all, which is all students out of the building. Right now, we are geared, as you know, towards the in-person learning plan, bringing our students back and providing that remote learning option to our families who wish to partake in that. Again, just the summary, the first plan, the in-person learning plan, it has a standard full-time schedule, but it looks and feels a little different due to the mitigation strategies that we have to put in place with masks, distancing, and other kinds of things like cohorting. The learning environment will be more restrictive than students would normally be used to. Less student contact, materials will be restricted in some ways, and small groups will be impacted in some ways as well. There's certainly some protocols, many protocols that are being changed, and many health service protocols as well. And so that is really a summary of the in-person learning, I think, that we've heard throughout the last month or so. As you know, parents can choose to have their children come back at this point in time. Our plan is choose to have your child come back full time, or choose the remote learning option. The remote learning option is by parent choice or by a medical need. Students will be at home, learning at home with an enhanced remote learning model. Students and parents will engage together, parents supporting their child, and obviously a blend of synchronous and asynchronous learning for that. I also want to just mention as we go to the next slide, obviously, that the other plans that we have that are there and available to us as we would need to move into them would be the hybrid learning model, where the remote learning option continues. Again, this plan really capitalizes on reducing the number of students in the building, the number of people in the building, if there's a surge in the community spread of COVID-19. And we have grouped our students accordingly by groups A and B. Groups A would be last names A through K, group B, L through Z, and that is to coordinate with Amity, who has done the same thing. So there would be a sibling opportunity of supervision, older child, older sibling to younger sibling, if parents are counting on something like that during the course of this particular time period. A will be in school on Monday, Thursday, groups B on Tuesday, Friday, and Wednesday. All students will be home with a distance learning component. This is certainly the area that is probably the most challenging to implement in some ways, an area that we still need to give some more attention in our planning if we are so called or so moved to move in that direction. And the last one is our full remote learning model. Again, this will be all students are out of the building and all students learning from home, similar to past spring, engaged in an enhanced model, which you'll be hearing about in a few moments. And again, a blend of synchronous and asynchronous learning and a model that includes a flexible Friday. As you know, we also have indicated that we are focusing obviously on safety and social emotional well-being of students. I'm on the next slide. And we have made some current calendar adjustments, as you know, to support orientation and professional development for teachers and preparation, which is all for the benefit of children. And so these particular dates have not changed since the last time I've spoken to you. I will say that local districts have been, since we last spoke, making some further calendar adjustments, not in the Bowood region, but in other places surrounding us. Districts that are simply saying, we just don't have enough time to get this put together. And so I know some districts have now started to say, we're going to start our students on September 3rd, Thursday, or the day after Labor Day, September 8th. We have not done that at this point. But I can tell you that time is a very big factor for us right now, especially with the last couple of days and what looks like the next few days going ahead with the difficulty of work and communication. The building is closed. We can do a lot remotely if we can get in touch with each other. So just to put that there. I'm going to call upon a few of our leaders who are able to get on this call tonight for the next slide. Just a little bit of reopening committee updates. And I'm going to just kind of fly by the seat of our pants here. I'm hoping that everybody can do that, but I know a few that can't. Doreen, are you able to speak right now?
Yes.
Go ahead.
All right, thanks. I've been facilitating the protocol subcommittee work. Our committee is comprised of 10 teachers, 5 teaching assistants, and Kathy Salinardi, our extended day director. We're working on developing protocols for classroom use and school-wide. Some of the classroom protocols include ideas for morning meeting, readers, writers, and math workshop, use of kindergarten centers, and how special area subjects will be instructed. Some school-wide protocols include entrance and exit of students to the building, parent drop-offs and pickups, mask breaks, restroom usage, recess, PLC and faculty meetings, visitors to the building, PPT and 504 meetings, parent-teacher conferences, and open house. We also formed a subgroup to look more specifically at cafeteria use and transportation. And members of this group consisted of one teacher, one teaching assistant, Lola Johnson, Jane Roddy, Al Pulo, and Beth Cohen from B&B Transportation.
Thank you, Doreen. Thanks very much. I'm going to go to Cheryl right now, Cheryl Mammon, our Director of Special Services, who, if she's able to get on to give a little update.
I am on. Thank you so much. I have two committees to speak about. The first one I'll speak about is our Social Emotional Committee, and that was comprised of general education teachers, special education teachers, parents, teaching assistant, and of course, school psychologists. And the most important thing that came out of that committee was how critical it is to focus on the social emotional needs of our students, staff, and our families. So the first 6 weeks of school, the committee really felt strongly about the first 6 weeks of school being focused on responsive classroom, building those communities. And then we broke into 3 committees within that group of focusing on what the family's needs are, the staff needs, as well as students, and how we would meet that. Some highlights are some videos will be sent out ahead of time to students, focusing on what the staff needs are. They're in professional development regarding social emotional needs, and for the students, what they need when they come back and before they come back. So that would be the social emotional focus. And in special education, the committee was comprised of special education teachers from the primary, from the intermediate, our BCBA, which is the behavior analyst, our related service staff members. So looking at all the different areas that would emphasize what they, looking from different angles. We looked at all different protocols, including confidentiality. What type of PPE was going to be needed, especially if you're working with students who are unable to wear masks. What small group instruction would look like and how those groups would be formed. We did talk specifically about students with high needs and how to meet the needs of those students, as well as making sure that the staff members were safe. Everything with the student, all of our students with IEPs, we're going to be looking individually what their needs are. So we may have a plan, and depending on what's going on with the student, whether it's their health or whatever their needs are, we may have to make adjustments. The other piece we looked at was teaching assistants and how we can minimize how many students each person works with, so to minimize the contact points for people. And some other protocols we looked at were hand washing, toileting, and anything else. The other thing was for planning and placement team meetings and 504s, really looking at how we can best meet the needs of our families, as well as keeping everyone safe. So it's preferred that people do virtual meetings, but we can also accommodate in person, but they'd have to be with masks and spacing and things like that. So that's just some highlights of the 2 committees that I was on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cheryl. I'm going to see, I know our business manager and facilities managers we're having difficulty logging on. Al or Vito, are you able to give an update from your committee work? Okay, they may get on, and I believe Stacy, our nurse supervisor, was unable as well to get on here. So I'm going to now turn it over to Lisa Sherman, who will go into the next part of our presentation, which I know an area that the board and many parents have wanted to hear more about, and that is, what does our remote learning plan look like? So Lisa will go ahead and start that.
Good evening, everybody. I need to start by echoing what Bob said earlier. Just a giant thank you to all of the teaching assistants and teachers who have been working so incredibly hard at doing this work this summer. They have worked very, very diligently to help create this remote learning plan that I am going to be giving you some information about tonight. So I want to start by letting you know that we actually, I see that my screen is still loading, I'm so sorry. We actually started by looking back at the survey that we gave in the spring. And we looked at the survey that we gave to parents, to teaching assistants, to teachers, and to our students, and tried to gather some of the big bucket ideas that we were hearing across all of those different stakeholders. And some of that feedback that we heard pretty loud and clear was the need for more live instruction, especially around small groups and the ability to meet with students one-on-one and in small groups to really support their learning, and also to check in on their social emotional needs. A lot of teachers talked about how they started having some small group sessions with kids, and it wasn't as much academically driven so much as it was just checking in on the kids to see how they were doing. So we heard that loud and clear from both parents and from teachers. We heard a lot about different feedback. Some parents felt as if there was not enough feedback. Some parents felt as if the feedback was given, but it could have been a little bit more in depth. From teachers, we heard that it was so hard to manage the feedback because students were completing the work at all different times of the day, and so work was coming in constantly. So we heard a lot about feedback. Tech support and professional development was a huge theme across parents and teachers. Parents mentioned a lot of consistency, a need for consistency within a grade level and also just across the grade level. So we heard that loud and clear from many people. And then we also heard actually from everybody, I think, the clear expectations for families, for students, for everybody, to make sure that we're all sort of on the same page and moving in the same direction. So that's what we learned from some of the survey feedback. We started by talking about what remote learning really is. And so I'm not going to read this whole screen to you. You can take a minute to read it yourself. But we really talked about how this is where we are not together physically, but we're really working together very, very closely. And we talked a lot about, you'll hear this language a lot, you've been hearing it already, the synchronous and the asynchronous learning. And synchronous learning means that teachers and students are engaged in lessons or activities at exactly the same time. Now, this can happen in person, which obviously is the easiest and the best way to do synchronous learning, or it could happen virtually where a teacher is meeting with a small group of students or a one-on-one at a specific time. And so the child is then required to be in attendance at that time. So we talked a lot about synchronous and asynchronous learning, and we're going to talk more about that. I do want to emphasize that what I am talking about right now is if the school is in a full remote learning shutdown. So that means the school is closed, the building is empty, what we did in the spring. So I'm really spending a lot of time talking about that plan right now. So a lot of what you're going to hear me say is around that. At the end of this presentation, I'm going to talk about what this will look like if we are in an in-person model and we have some students who are opting out of that in-person model, but that will be at the end of the presentation. But everything right now is about the full remote learning planning where all students are learning remotely. So one of the pieces of feedback, as I mentioned, was around accountability and expectations. And there was a lot of talk about having very, very clear set expectations for everybody. We heard parents and students and teachers talk about the need for a contract. So we actually have developed a contract for our students, you'll see that in a second, and for our parents and for our teachers. So this just looks like some of the ideas I mentioned on the screen: providing an appropriate workspace for the students, making sure that parents are limiting interruptions. A lot of our teacher feedback was around the need to make sure that they had the students' attention as best they can through a screen, and getting interruptions or parents coming in and out or parents cooking in the background, or making sure that the child is in a space where they can really concentrate on what's happening. And then of course the need for technology support as needed. For students, we talked about just the engagement, making sure that they're ready for school and making sure that they're ready to dive into the learning. And for teachers, some of the stuff that we've already talked about, the need for daily live teaching, student check-ins, communication, and ongoing feedback. We did hear very clearly that the template that was provided was a little challenging for parents to navigate, and they thought that it would be much better if it was organized by day rather than by content area. So our remote learning template has been reorganized by day rather than content area, and teachers will be using that as a way to communicate with parents, sort of an overview of what's expected for the week. This is a sample of the student contract. I'm not going to read it to you. You can take a minute to read it on the screen. It's very clear Now, teachers might also develop some expectations for Google Meetings, because when teachers and students are engaging in Google Meetings, it's really important that the child is engaged and participating fully and prepared and ready to go. So the child and the teacher and the class may even develop a contract just for Google Meetings, or a set of expectations for Google Meetings. But this is what we're looking for from our students. Another question that we heard a lot is around curriculum. How will we know what students have learned, what they haven't learned, where they're starting in the fall, what do we need to do to catch them up? I know a lot of parents had some worries around that. So we talked a lot this summer around curriculum. And actually what we did is that we focused all of our summer curriculum work around language arts and mathematics. And teachers were given the opportunity to have vertical conversations. They actually began their work. We gave them the expectation that they begin their work with a vertical conversation. And actually, to back up even further, before that vertical conversation even happened, we asked teachers to fill out a grid of what they managed to teach and what they didn't cover when we shut down in the spring. So everyone was very clear, and they had that to jump off of with a conversation. And then they had a conversation with the grade level below them and the grade level above them. And they used that document as a way to talk through the learning that happened up until our shutdown in March, the learning that happened during the shutdown, and the content area that they didn't get to. And they actually drilled down even into different standards. So they had that conversation, and then the grade levels went back and they reviewed their pacing and the priority standards. They really dug into what was the priority standards for each grade level every year. How can we make sure that we're covering those priority standards? Where do we need to fit those in throughout the school year? And they took all of that and made a new pacing for the 2020-2021 school year. So our teachers have been doing that work all summer long. It's ongoing still at different grade levels. And of course, our mathematics and language arts curriculum leaders supported this work throughout the summer. This is an example of the summer curriculum work checklist that we provided with our teachers. This is a draft sample schedule, and I just want to emphasize one more time that this sample schedule is if we are in a full remote shutdown. You'll notice that, well, let me talk you through it first, actually. The green boxes that you see are live teaching time with the teacher, where the student and the teacher is engaged in learning together at the same time through a screen, through virtual screens. Yellow is where there are options for other live meetings, things like snack breaks or lunch recesses. Sometimes at the end of the day, there's an opportunity for a check-in. So there's a lot of opportunity throughout the day for live meetings. The schedule also has an opportunity for breaks throughout the day, because another piece of feedback that we heard pretty loud and clear across all of our stakeholders was having a child on a screen all day long without breaks was really, really challenging. And that would be challenging for anybody. That would be challenging for adults as well. So we did also build in breaks throughout the day for our children. We gave them a nice long lunch recess break, we gave them snack breaks, we gave them movement breaks, we gave them an opportunity for a read aloud, we gave them an opportunity for specials. So there's a lot of flexibility within the schedule. Now, it's also really important to note that this schedule is for intermediate students, probably third, fourth, maybe fifth grade. This would look different if you were in a primary grade or if you were even in sixth grade. So really important to note that the different grade levels and multi-age program will also look very different depending on the age of the child and their developmental needs. Importantly, though, I want to just again emphasize that we really did a blend of live and recorded lessons. Some of the feedback we received from teachers was concerns around not being able to provide instruction to students who were not available at a specific time slot. So for example, if we said, I'm going to teach a math lesson at 9 o'clock and we have 5 kids that are not able to be on at 9 o'clock for whatever reason, then those 5 kids have then missed the instruction. So the goal for our teacher was to provide some flexibility for the parents and the students and the families, and to provide those recorded recorded lessons that can be revisited and reviewed and watched anytime the students needed to watch them, but then also provide opportunities for differentiated instruction through small group live instruction. So that was the direction that the teachers took. And that also came a lot from feedback from parents who really expressed the need for flexibility and some support throughout the day. Some parents reported that they were working all day and they couldn't really help their kids till the end of the day. And so we were really thinking about ways that we can make the lessons accessible anytime parents needed them, anytime students needed them. There's a number of other considerations to take into account with remote learning. The first, and Cheryl talked a little bit about this, is the emphasis on the social and emotional needs, and not just on our students, but also on our families, on the whole entire school, and also on our teachers and our staff. We have to make sure we're all taking care of one another because we all know that this is just a really challenging time. And then we have a tornado that knocks out our power. So we have to just make sure that we're really taking care of everybody, including our little people. We also have a lot of conversations around professional development, and in a minute you're going to see a draft of just one day of professional development for our teachers. So we are very grateful that we are going to have a few extra days at the beginning of the school year to launch our professional development and to really focus in on some of our technology needs. And we've also been talking a lot about what professional development will look like through the year, and we know it's going to look a little bit different this year. Technology is a huge area of support and concern for many people. We are going to, at the end of last year, late spring, we did launch a dedicated parent help desk for technology support, and that is going to go live at the beginning of the year for parents who need it. And a lot of teachers also began building virtual classrooms, and so that is other work that they're going to continue doing. And virtual classrooms just allow an interactive opportunity for students to get the work that they need, get the ideas and the links and everything that they need all in one fun, very cute space. Material and technology distribution, we learned a lot in the spring about how to collect, distribute materials, and we are going to make sure that we streamline our processes and make it very clear and clean and easy for all of our families. And we're also talking a lot about our teacher assistants. And again, I'm so grateful because a number of them have been spending their summers with us, doing this work, thinking through problems, thinking about ways that they can support the teachers and the students, and thinking about ways that they can dive into this work even more than they did in the spring. So as I mentioned, this is a sample of one professional development day. This is just a draft. We are beginning to think through our first 6 days and really gather some ideas together and think through what a day of learning can look like for our teachers. And this is based, again, on the model of starting school in full remote learning. So the whole day is really focused on remote learning. Should we be in person, which is what our plan is right now, our in-person plan looks a little bit different, where we give the teachers some time for classroom setup and some other work that they need to do in person. So a little summary of what will be different between the spring and the fall should we start with a remote learning opportunity in the fall. First of all, like I said, we will have clear expectations for parents and students. We will be sending home that contract for everybody to sign off on and read and understand to make sure that everybody understands exactly what we're looking for during remote learning. Live instruction will be provided daily by both classroom teachers and specialists, done through small group instruction so that we can also support differentiation and social emotional needs of our kids. We have built time into our schedule so that teachers can provide consistent, meaningful feedback. We've also talked a lot about having a cutoff time, letting teachers know that at this hour, this is when the feedback is going to stop, and then they will be revisiting student work the next day. That's something that we're still wrestling with a little bit because it's in our nature to want to keep helping kids all the time, even 9 o'clock at night. So we're working through what that could look like for us. I mentioned the parent help desk for technology needs, professional development for all staff. And I have to say again that we learned a lot in the spring. The original task of trying to manage materials for over 800 kids was incredibly daunting back in April, but we've developed some processes and protocols, and we are refining those, and we're going to make them even better in the fall should we need to. So I spent a lot of time talking about the remote learning model should we shut down our building and switch to a remote learning model. But now I'm going to talk a little bit about if we are in-person school, which is what our plan is right now. Our plan right now is for 100% in-person. And we know that there will be some parents and students who choose the remote learning option. So what will that look like? I want to say, first of all, that this is obviously incredibly challenging on many different levels, but there's a few things that we really know for sure. We do know for sure that all students will be assigned a grade level specific teacher. Those teachers will be providing asynchronous and synchronous learning. We know that for sure too. That might look a little bit different, but it will definitely happen. Teachers will still be checking in with students in small groups or one-to-one, depending on numbers, depending on the size of their remote learning class, and depending upon what those classes will look like. Teachers are again going to be utilizing our online platforms, which is what we would do if we were in a full remote learning model, Google Classroom and ClassDojo. Tech support will still be provided to parents. These are things that we know for sure. Teachers will also be communicating that remote learning plan weekly in that template that I mentioned already that is organized by day rather than by content area. Those are some things that we know for sure for the parents who choose the in-person model. Now, as I mentioned, there are a number of challenges to the remote learning option during the in-person model. First of all, the responsibility for a teacher to plan and instruct is very different. In the spring, a lot of our teachers shared out the recording of lessons. So you might see one teacher on the grade level recording all of the reading lessons, another teacher doing math, another teacher doing writing, and so on and so forth. A teacher who is teaching the remote learning model will be responsible for teaching reading, writing, math, science, social studies, all the content areas. So obviously that teacher planning and prep time is very different, which would have an impact on the amount of synchronous and asynchronous time that the teacher is able to provide to students. We also know that students may have the opportunity to enter and exit remote learning. So a student may start in person in the fall and then have to, for whatever reason, leave the in-person learning and move to remote learning. And that child might then be assigned to the remote learning teacher. So the remote learning teacher could potentially have students exiting and entering their remote classroom. The number of one-to-one or small group check-ins might also be different depending upon the number of students, and again, depending upon the planning and prep time that that teacher is engaging in. And the feedback will also obviously be different. And we do know for sure that the quantity and the frequency of specialist lessons will definitely be lessened. They will be provided an opportunity to engage in some of the specialist work, but obviously a special area teacher can't teach in person and remote at the exact same time. And then I put others down there because at this point, since we've never done it before, there may be things that we haven't even thought of that may become a challenge that we will discover when we're doing it. So because this is new to all of us, we may discover things as we go that are challenges and that we have to sort of work through together as a community and as a school and as a staff to solve together. So that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Lisa, very much for a very comprehensive review of that. I'm sure that's going to be greatly appreciated by all who are listening or those who see a recording of that in the coming days. I'm going to just go ahead and hit the last few slides of this presentation, and then we'll be glad to take some questions. So just again to clarify for everybody, our current reopening plans and status right now are that we are gearing ourselves and planning for a full 5-day in-person learning plan model with the remote learning option that Lisa spoke about just in those last few slides. And the considerations as we move forward, next slide, our considerations as we move forward with our planning is we know that we have fluid information and fluid direction coming from the state somewhat constantly. We are certainly, while we have a plan in place and it's a plan that we're gearing towards, we are certainly, as other districts, watching the trend data as the month of August proceeds forward. You may have heard about the flexibilities that the state has spoken about. The flexibilities that the state spoke about were geared towards moving between a full in-person model, which is what we are looking at and doing, and the hybrid model. The flexibilities do not include going to a full remote plan unless the district petitions the state for a waiver and it gets approved by the state. Obviously, our focus is on health and safety and social, emotional, and transition to academics, and of course, the resources and staffing. I will say that we are going to be very closely watching the health data and being in very close contact with QVHD. We are all watching the superintendents, the numbers by county that recently, the matrix that was released in terms of that being the guiding numbers for looking at either low, moderate, or high transmissions. We will consult obviously with QVHD, as I mentioned. We are also making sure and monitoring our ability to implement the mitigation strategies that are there with masks and distancing. We are also very interested in seeing the data that will come in from parents as we send our survey or our commitment communication tomorrow, and that is to see the number of students who will be coming to the building and the number of students who parents wish to have the remote option be taken for their child. We'll also be looking and working with our staffing data, which is certainly part of our very, very important part of how we put this all together. And we're in communication with our sister districts in BOA. And all of that will be keeping the Board of Education and our school community informed about all of that. Just as I go on to the last couple slides, I do want to say that we have, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, many reopening challenges. Time is one of them. In fact, this is comprehensive planning more than any of us have ever seen or done before, and a different kind of planning that we've ever done before. The fact that we're staffing 2 programs, both in person as we normally would in a normal year, as well as a remote option. That's two different programs at the same time. Also, we want to make sure that we are aware and that we're able to communicate realistic expectations because we want to make sure everybody understands challenges we have and how we're able to meet those. There's budget implications as a challenge. We do know that at points along the way, parents may decide to make a change. And just so you know, we've talked about it before. We're asking parents and saying we need at least a week notice. 1 week's notice if you're going to make a change. And that is pretty much a standard measure across the region in most districts in terms of how they're looking at that. And of course, we have the challenge of changing guidance and the timing of guidance, and sometimes the timing is immediate from the state, and that's not a comment against the state. It's just that they're having their challenges as well. So the last slide just really talks about what are our next steps, and our next steps at this point is that after tonight's presentation, we're going to be hoping to have a successful video clip of this presentation that we can send along with a very, very comprehensive frequently asked questions FAQ document to parents and a survey. Parents have been asking lots of questions, and we've been taking questions off of social media and also fielding those questions. And so we have developed, I believe, a good list of answers for questions that are being currently asked by parents. And any questions that are not on there that are not answered, we'll be glad to take a phone call. Any of your administrative team members will be glad to take a phone call or an email, be able to try to answer those questions you might have. But we are planning, our goal is tomorrow to send to all families a communication that provides the FAQs, this presentation, and the survey for them to make a commitment for each of their children. Our reopening committee subgroups continue to do their work as we move forward. And we'll be looking at the data coming back from all parents in the coming days, next week, and looking at the planning that goes on. Working with our staff members, we're trying to be very conscious and aware of the individual needs that staff members have, and trying to do everything we can within the means of the kinds of leaves that are available to make any kinds of situations work the best they can, and to continue to communicate. So with that, I would, and I guess I should add in one thing is that some of you may have also heard today, Governor Lamont did make some comments regarding school reopening, and he actually, a lot of it was budgetary in nature. We know that this is going to cost more than what we budgeted because of the nature of offering two programs concurrently. And so there has been additional monies appropriated apparently, and as many as $50 million across the state for staffing, which will be one of our biggest unbudgeted expenses. And he also drew on some data that that was interesting. He said superintendents across the state have indicated that 55% of the districts are fully planning on a full in-person model, similar to what we're doing. 44% of the districts across the state are using some form of hybrid within their K-12 districts, and it may be fully in the K-12, or it may be just at the high school and middle school, which is where the hybrid has seemed to become more prevalent because of the needing to, the challenge of cohorting students. So anyway, that's just some very fresh data from this afternoon. So with that, I'll stop and turn it back over to the board chair.
Bob, I want to thank you and Lisa and Doreen and Cheryl for your work tonight and the presentation. I want to extend thanks from the board to the teachers, the teacher assistants, to Al Pulo, to Vito Asparo, to Stacy Katz, our medical advisor, and the people who are serving on the reopening committee. And thanks to all of the teachers and TAs who have joined subcommittees. That your work is daunting and amazing, and certainly appreciated by all of us. So I'm going to open the floor to the board for discussion. Joyce, do you want to start? Any comments or questions?
Thank you, Lynn. I have a few reactions and questions. First of all, I echo Lynn in thanking the administration, the teachers, and the staff for so tirelessly working on all of these plans. And I am deeply grateful to the teachers and the teaching staff, and staff members, especially since they have sacrificed huge chunks of their summer to try to pull this off. So just a huge thank you to them. I would wonder if it might make sense for us to give an opportunity to parents to ask questions at some sort of town hall type event so that they can digest the information that they have received and then ask to follow up on certain items that they might want to know about in order to make an informed decision on the parent survey. So that would be a first question. The second question I have is, thank you, Lisa, for doing a wonderful job on the presentation. I guess I think that it might be very helpful for parents to understand the differences among the different distance learning plans. So there was one in the spring, and because we were caught shorthanded, of course, we tried to do our best, but we have learned from that experience. But it would be helpful as one data point, and then to show how that compares to the opt-out option for the parents who don't want to send their kids into school. And then the third is the 100% distance learning. So just having sort of, three views of distance learning, I think might be very helpful for parents to understand better what it is that they would be getting. On the hybrid plan, I guess I'm a little bit concerned that we would be spending time on this. And the reason is that I haven't come across anyone so far who can say to me that a hybrid plan, and this is the hybrid plan that's put out by the state that's rotational, that it is operationally feasible. And so given that it seems very infeasible to pull this off, I'm wondering whether we should spend a lot of time on it. And I guess one might say, well, the state might mandate that school districts move to the hybrid plan. However, I would think that there's another way of looking at it, which is that the intent of the hybrid plan is to reduce by about half the number of people in the school building. And so if we can do that through our in-person and our remote learning plans, the way that we want to do it at Beecher, we will effectively satisfy the intent of the hybrid plan. But we're doing it in a way that better meets the needs of our community. Given that we have so much to do and so little time, I think it's really important to prioritize the most necessary activities, which is to focus on remote learning and to focus on in-person learning. The other aspect I wanted to mention is I do think that it is important to try to open for a lot of reasons. Of course, there is a state mandate, but more importantly, there are a significant number of families in our community who need school. And I think it is important for us to be responsive to their needs, just like we want to be responsive to the needs of those families who aren't comfortable sending their kids to school. But for the families that are returning, I think it's really important. And I know that you said it in your presentation, but I think it's important to really underscore how different the experience is going to be for those kids. So, you know, of course, there are going to be lots of different rules and protocols that will have to be enforced rigorously. But on top of that, what makes the Beecher learning experience so rich is going to be not there. I mean, you know, we typically at Beecher, we have this workshop interactive model, and there's not, just because of the social distancing, there's not going to be the turn and talk, the small group work, the you know, the breakout groups. It can't happen because of the social distancing that's required. And then if you think about the intimacy between a teacher and students, that's going to be hard to achieve as well with social distancing. So if you have, for example, a teacher that needs to console a student, that's going to have to happen at least 6 feet apart, and whatever is heard by that one student is probably going to be heard by the whole entire class. So again, these are just a few examples of how so different the in-person experience is going to be. And so parents have to understand that it's not going to be back to school, back to normal at all. And there is the likelihood that if we have a case, a positive case, which is not unlikely given the numbers in our school, that not only would that student's class be quarantined, but then if that student has siblings, the siblings' class might have to be quarantined, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, on buses, even though we cohort, the students are mixing across cohorts. So it would be a very disruptive learning experience, possibly. And then on top of that, from a childcare perspective, that might be a nightmare. So these are just considerations that I think parents really need to understand when they choose an in-person learning experience for their kids. And the last thing I want to mention is that the task that we are facing is completely daunting. There's so many challenges. And, you know, parents have very high expectations in this community. And I'm one of those parents, and I'm probably head up that pack, guilty as charged. But having said that, having sat in as many meetings as I have with the reopening, and having talked to as many people as I have, and knowing the challenges that we face, I think that we have to be very patient with each other. I think we would all want to support our administrators and teachers in really prioritizing and making sure that we do what is essential and not much more, because if we try to do too much, we risk not doing anything well. And so, you know, we need to work together, continue to work together. Parents need to give feedback. And I would say that our school leaders in turn need to be flexible and nimble and adapt to the situation, and if necessary, abandon if things aren't working out as necessary. But again, I just want to say thank you to the teams of people that are coming together to try to pull this off. I know that people are working incredibly hard, and you know, I just we can't thank you enough for all of your efforts.
Thank you, Joyce. Bob or Lisa, do you have any response or comments, or do you want to move on?
It's up to you as the board chair. We can hear all that. We can hear all of the comments if you want first, and then try to respond to the
Why don't we
commonalities or whatever, or however you want to
do that? Okay. Jeff Hughes, tonight you're next on my list.
Great, thank you. Excellent job to all the committees involved. There's a lot of hard work in a very quick time, so it's quite impressive what you came up with. I have to slightly disagree with Joyce. I think the teachers at Beecher are very adaptable and creative, and I think they're going to provide an excellent in-learning experience. I think some rules are going to be in place, but I think it's just going to be a rich in-person experience, and I'm looking forward to that. A question for Bob coming up. He alluded to maybe needing more time for preparing for the school year. I'd like to just have him touch upon that if he could when it's his turn to speak. Other than that, I think we're ready. I think the plan looks good.
Thank you, Jeff. You got that question, Bob, for later?
Yeah, I do. Yep.
I'll make a clarification. I wasn't saying that the teachers were not being adaptable. If anything, I'm saying the contrary. I'm just saying that we as a group need to be able to adapt and abandon if necessary. So I didn't want to leave anyone with the impression that I was saying that people were not adaptable.
And Joyce, what you were saying is the teachers themselves said. So I think it's fair to repeat their concerns about what the experience will be like.
Okay, Dan Cowan, you're next on my list tonight.
Okay, so I'll be quick, and I do want to dovetail. I mean, Joyce, I will say I listened very carefully what you said, and what you said was what makes Beecher Road is that in-personal experience with the group lessons, blah blah blah. You said it will not happen, and so that was like a quote. So I push back against you as well and say it will happen, and I look forward to the robust in-person experience as well. I want to thank everybody that has worked on this plan. Obviously, it was a huge amount of work, like overwhelmed me as I listened to Principal Sherman speak. So I look forward to actually watching it when I receive the video again, so I can fully digest it. The only thing I would add to this is I understand that I personally want my daughter to go back to school full time. But I understand I have a place of privilege where I can teach a remote session if I had to. So I just want to make sure that there's some place on that survey that goes out, hopefully, that says, I want my child to go back, but I understand there's people that have more need than I do, and I will give up my slot if there's a 50% percentage or something like that. Like, I would be willing to take my daughter out, even though I don't want it, if somebody else needs it, because there's people who need it, and I'm not one of them. So that's the only thing. I don't know how you do that, but there's got to be some mechanism.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Jeff Townsend, you're next on my list tonight.
Thanks very much. So I really appreciate all the administration has done. It's, of course, been a crazy sprint in the face of some very serious obstacles in a very short time scale. So thank you so much for all you're doing this summer. I had a couple points, things I want to cover here. So one of them is as someone who can maybe go over this pretty quickly, I'm going to take some time to go over something if I can. And that is to share a little bit of a sense to people of what we're talking about in terms of the epidemiological risk, and I'm just going to rely on what we know right now to tell it. So don't be too concerned. I'm just going to take a moment to share something with you guys, which just should be clear enough. I'm going to have to do it in a way that I didn't expect. Hold on one second. So I'm just sharing the screenshot from the COVID-19 in Connecticut today from the COVID Act Now website, which has reliable information on the epidemiology of the disease. The good news that all of you are probably well aware of is that Connecticut, compared to many, many states, is in a very, very good place in a relative sense. Here are just a number of statistics that people often use. I don't think I need to go through any of them, except for I want to just talk about one of them right now, which is this daily new cases, which right now in Connecticut is about 2.7 per 100,000 people, which is pretty low on a daily new cases standard. So that's all very good and important information. And I think the reason I want to present this is I think it's important for people to understand this if they're going to make decisions about what they might do in terms of holding kids back from school or putting them in school. So I just want to present a very rough calculation so everyone has an idea of what the current status is. And the calculation that I'm making right now is based on the daily new cases as of today. Of course, this is not going to, all of these things are subject to change, and I'll have a few words to share about that in a moment. But let me just give you this rough calculation of expectation. Woodbridge's population is around 8,750. Beecher School population is around 1/10 of that. Daily cases in Connecticut, as I mentioned, is about 2.7 per 100,000 population. So if you just do the simple math of this, that's 2.7 per 100,000 times 850 means about 0.2 cases per day in Woodbridge, about a case each 5 days. If you've been following the news from Beth Heller, you probably heard that's approximately on the order of what we're seeing. It changes over time and it is clustered, which is something that I'm going to talk about in a moment. And that also means about 0.02 cases per day in the Beecher School. Now, of course, this is all based on, the rate happening across Connecticut, happening in Woodbridge, and that's not exactly what's going on, but it gives us a base expectation for thinking about things. That translates to about 1 case in about 50 days, and that's 50 calendar days, not 50 school days, or about 1 per 2 months. So our baseline expectation should be about the fact if we just stayed on exactly the course we're on today, which of course we won't, but just so you know, we were on exactly the course we would today, we would expect about 1 case showing up in Beecher schools every 2 months or so. Now, there's a bunch of things to consider in interpreting that. One is that cases actually occur, of course, in an epidemiology sense in clusters, right? So in most cases, 1 case occurs in one place, and then that means several other cases occur in that place, which means it's actually more likely that, it's not like we would get 1 case in 50 days and 1 case in 50 days. It's more likely we might get no cases for a long period of time, and then a cluster of cases, et cetera, et cetera. So just keep that in mind. It's not going to be, 1 and then none. And it could be much worse in terms of having an outbreak in one area. But it also means that there's quite a substantial possibility with a rate like 2.7 per day that there would be no cases for quite a long time. And then the second thing, of course, to keep in mind is that there are other states, as everyone knows, in the union, and other states are not doing nearly as well as Connecticut is. And that is a serious problem because there is, as we had in the policy debated earlier today, there are issues of the possibility of importing cases from other states and such as that. And then the last point that everyone needs to keep in mind is that most epidemiologists believe that as winter comes, the caseload is likely to increase. So even if we kept everything going exactly as we are now, as the winter comes, we should expect up to a 10-fold increase in cases. Now, the criterion advanced for the state, just so everyone can be clear, is that we are in a low risk situation as long as we have as long as we have less than 10 for this number, 2.7 number, going back to the COVID-19 thing, less than 10 here means we're in a low risk situation according to the guideline that was sent out. That translates to 1 case per day in Woodbridge and 1 case every 10 days in Beecher. So I'll let anyone interpret that for what it means, but that's what that translates to if you do the math on it. All right, so I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood what those were and what that meant for the community that we're in before everyone makes the decisions that they have to make this weekend about what they want to do in terms of in-person and remote learning and in terms of all of those things. The only other thing I want to just talk about quickly is I do appreciate the flexibility issue that Dan was talking about. I do think that some parents may have more flexibility about in-person learning or remote option, taking in a remote option, and other parents won't. And I think it behooves us as a board and as a community to try to incorporate the understanding of what flexibility different members of the community have in that regard. So I hope that when people fill out surveys, et cetera, that they acknowledge that there is some there may not be a yes or no decision made here. There should be some sort of quantitative thought about how much each individual may or may not be able to do an in-person or a remote option. Of course, some members of the community have elderly relatives that live with them. That is a serious risk issue for those elderly relatives if COVID-19 were to be transmitted in the school and brought back. Others don't have that situation. There are many, many different situations. It's very hard for us to enumerate all the situations that everyone has in their own home and in the community that they interact with. So I think it's very important that we sort of try to take on board everyone's position and with regard to their ability to be in person or remote. And that's the last sentiment that I want to express, and I'll pass it on to the next board member.
Jeff, thank you, and thank you for sharing that information to the community. I think that's important. Megan, you're next on my list tonight.
Hi there. Yeah, I guess to start, to echo what I think everyone has said, is to thank everyone. This is a fluid and challenging situation, of course, and it's really great to see the community pulling together and teachers and admin and whatnot putting so much time into this. So thank you all. I think a lot of what I was thinking has been voiced already, so I'll try to keep it brief, but I do want to echo a few things what others have said as well. The time in the beginning, I know we've talked about, Bobby mentioned potentially pushing back a little, so I, again, also would like to hear a little bit more on that. I do think it's important that we prioritize helping our teachers get as much PD as they need so they feel confident and ready for what's coming ahead. So I certainly would be open to pushing school back. I know not everyone is excited about that, but I do think we need to get our teachers ready. The town hall concept that Joyce brought up, actually, I thought that was a great idea as well, to get parent feedback. I don't know if it would make sense to do something with parents and teachers, but there definitely is a need for constant feedback, I think, as things progress. Joyce, you had also said this well, like prioritizing what's essential, focusing on the most important things, and doing that the best you can and growing from there, I think is super important. And I think a constant feedback loop, although it may feel overwhelming, will be important to keep that progressing. One thing, I guess I'm curious to learn more. I mean, Lisa did a great job, I think, presenting the remote learning options. It is interesting, and I think it'd be good to know the clear difference between those two. And I think one thing that I heard was that if you're in remote learning, you have a different teacher, and then when most people are in person, if you're opting into the remote learning, then most students would be in their primary teacher, but then if they're doing remote learning, they would be pulled out into a different teacher who's focusing on remote learning. So I think that's what I heard. So I guess just wanted to make sure that there's going to be clear, so are all within a grade that every teacher is going to try to stay on the same page, which I can imagine is challenging in a school as large as ours. So just wanting to, I guess, hear more about that, and that might not be appropriate for tonight, but just that's a challenge, I'm sure, to figure out. I guess one thing I just wanted to mention too, that actually goes against a little bit different from what others have said with the hybrid model is, Bob, you did mention 44% of the state is choosing to do that model. And a coworker of mine is, her district in Guilford is choosing to start in the hybrid model. And it's actually quite interesting the way they're doing it. I'm not saying we should switch our viewpoint on it right now, but it could be a useful tool at some point when you have time to think about it more. But, it does reduce the number of students in school. It does allow for small group in-person learning. And I guess what they found was that their synchronous learning and their asynchronous learning. So they found that they were able to do them both fairly successfully. So they're going to do the in-person together, and then when they're home for 2 days, it will be asynchronous. So the students will be kind of on their own. So just want to throw that out there, that there are models out there. If that does become something that we need to utilize, maybe checking in with other schools to get some ideas of what they're doing and how it's working well for them. And I think that's all I have.
Thank you, Megan. David Ross, you're on my list next.
Thank you. Echoing everybody else, thanks to the whole team for all the hard work. I know this is a Herculean task, so very much appreciated. I have a couple questions. I think we've had lots of chance for dialogue with teachers. Under the best of circumstances, being a teacher is really hard. Add in the pandemic and all of these safety precautions that we're hearing about and which directions people can walk and maintaining distance and all of the things, it's going to be much, much harder. We had this shift in the spring of then teachers needing to adapt to online teaching and learning, which is something that is a totally different sport and faces a whole separate array of challenges. And so now we're trying to juggle both at once. And I'm really worried about the structural conundrum we're creating for our teachers if we expect them to be able to do both at once, when either one of them would have been an enormous ask. And now we've built a structure that we're expecting in the current full plan that they're going to have a class that's part one and part the other at the same time. And I really don't understand how that works, honestly. I really worry that we're putting them into a position that's going to be very difficult for them to thrive in the way that we would like them to. I also haven't heard within this, I'm very worried about safety and staffing issues, so I have no idea what the numbers are, but I presume that there are some individuals who have medical conditions or other factors that make it impossible for them to physically be in the school. So this model, as far as I can tell, is predicated on assigning all of the kids to classes in the way that we've already done it, which must require approximately the same number of teachers working in the same way, but we can't possibly have the same number of teachers because some proportion aren't going to be able to do that. And I'm trying to map this onto the math of what seems to be clear. It's very clear that there's a subset of the community that must have quality in-person learning. It's also clear that there's some subset of the community that is not going to be interested in that and is going to want to have the remote option. And so I really want to understand how we can creatively leverage these dynamics to say that we might not need the same number of classes and we might be able to have some teachers specializing one way or the other, but there have to be ways to differentiate everybody's roles to get us to a better outcome. A couple of times I heard people say during the earlier part that the plan is for 100% in-person learning, according to the state. That's not what the state plan says. The state plan says we must offer that. It does not say that people must do it. It's very clear that families can choose to opt out. So we don't need to expect that. And I think we would be wise to find out now what numbers we ought to expect, because I think a lot of families are already making plans that they're going to prefer the remote. And in the same way that we need to have a team that is able to, I mean, the idea of 6 professional development days that's going to fix this problem, it's impossible. It's totally impossible. So we should start to think about how are we going to specialize so that we can have a team that is ready to provide the highest quality in-person learning to the extent that we need to, and the team that's going to be ready to lead the remote learning part. And I haven't heard anything about that here. And that to me is just going to be crucial as we move forward. Under the best of circumstances, I mean, if you look at Jeff's numbers, there's no chance that the school isn't going to be shut at some point and we're going to have remote learning. It's almost impossible. So we really need to be prepared to react and move. So I'd like to hear more about that. I'll stop there.
Thank you, David, for your comments. I would like to also explore, to piggyback on Megan's comment about additional time and looking at ways perhaps that we can provide our teaching staff with the time that they might need to prepare. Certainly this recent storm has not helped any of us in moving forward. So I would be interested in that. And I also, Megan, did see that Guilford was offering a hybrid model for the first month, so 6 weeks of school, as an tiered level of reentry. So I think it's interesting and might be something that we talk about, but I do see that as a really difficult plan to pull off in this amount of time. So, but if there was a group who wanted to explore that, I would be interested in doing that as well. So Bob, I'll give you an opportunity to respond to the questions and comments that were made. And Lisa, if you want to jump in, or any other presenter tonight, please feel free.
Sure. Thanks. Thank you, board members, for all your questions. And yeah, it is a daunting task. And there's some answers, or there's some thoughts here. And a lot of it is extremely difficult. We've never been down this road before. And I know you've heard that before, and it's absolutely true. I do want to also to give me an opportunity to say again that the staff, as someone had mentioned along the way, has been amazing in terms of their gift of time, both certified and non-certified staff, in terms of working together with us on so many different things and so many things that still need to be done. I'm going to hit a couple of the common things that I heard here. First of all, continued opportunities for parents to be able to ask questions. So time is of the essence, and that's one of the other things we heard here. So we have to have decisions made now. We're doing the best we can. We kind of got caught short with the storm in terms of what we might have done. We were going to put this survey out to start getting our actual numbers figured out as of a couple days ago if we had this meeting on Tuesday night. So that's why we have a very robust, frequently asked question and answer document that's going out. We certainly want to make sure that's out there. And I think actually the town halls or the forums, as we move forward in this process, to help us along the way, to help the administration and teachers along the way to get the parent feelings about how it's going, will be important. But at this point, many of the plans are already in place. We're now in the getting ready to implement part of the process. And so I think we can't hold the process of asking what is the plan for your child at this point. And so I would like to look at that town hall as a movement forward, as a tool as we move forward. Time, many of you asked about time. So I think this is something that we're going to have to determine in the very, very near future in terms of saying, are we going to look at pushing the start day back by 3 days or a week in order to make sure we are ready to start the way we want to start. I will say, though, that does not necessarily mean that we're going to add teacher professional development days. There's a certain number of days that are prescribed by contract. So really what we're talking about is we be pushing the start of everything, the start of PD a few days later and the start of the actual school year a little later. Because we have not been given any other flexibility or any other forgiveness of days by the governor in an executive order to do anything other than keeping by the same number of days that we have. There's been a number of you brought up the hybrid model. The hybrid model, yes, it's a difficult one. So for many people, I believe that it is something that helps to maybe make one feel better because there'll be fewer students in the building and more distancing. The sheer use of the hybrid model across the region will actually start to impact potentially our staffing already. Because if I'm a parent in Guilford, let's say, and it's a hybrid model, and I'm a teacher at Beecher as well, I may need to take advantage of one of the leaves that are provided, the leave provisions that are provided in order to be at home with my child because my child's only going to be in school half the time. So the sheer use of the hybrid model across the region is going to have a domino effect on districts either way. And so it's just a very difficult situation that we're going to be. And the hybrid, of course, is only here half the time. There's many complexities of that. So I will say that. I also wanted to just address the survey and the flexibility. Our survey is pretty much set. We have talked to many other places regarding their surveys, many other districts in terms of their approach. The simplistic approach has really been the way to go with, just simply, which way are you planning for your child? What's the commitment you're making for your child? We certainly can consider the idea of asking are you flexible in terms of changing your option if that helps the school district? I think that's the question I think I'm hearing, or the point that I think I'm hearing to to be put in there. We don't have that in there right now, and we're ready to start to send this out tomorrow. So the administrative team will certainly think about that and weigh that maybe as a benefit, as I guess I'm hearing from some board members. I think I know there was a question about. No, there was a couple of questions about staffing. Staffing both the remote learning model as well as side by side with our staffing of our regular traditional program of classrooms, and the concern about staff safety, as similar to the concern about student safety. Those are things we are concerned about as well. This model begs us to have additional staffing more than we have right now in order to make this a quality program in both arenas. The staffing is one of the key components as we get the student data back from parents, who's going to be on site, who is not going to be on site, and making sure we do create that team of remote teachers who are going to be meeting the needs of those students at home. I'm gonna just ask if my administrative team would like to just add in or just add to any of those or fill in the gaps of things I may have missed there. Lisa, Doreen, or Cheryl?
I think, sorry. Staffing is something that we are still definitely working through. And I think, though, just to clarify that the thinking is not that teachers who are teaching in person will also be teaching remotely. The thinking is that there will be a separate teacher who is out for whatever reason, who is unable to be physically in the building, but is able to continue working remotely. That those people would be the remote learning, the dedicated remote learning teachers. So it is not our expectation at this point that we would have a teacher teaching in person and teaching the remote students, the students who choose the remote option at the same time. That is not our intention at this point. And then the PD time, I agree that 6 days, it's more than we've ever had, but it definitely doesn't seem like enough, which is why we're talking a lot about what will our faculty meetings look like at the beginning of the year, what will our PD time look like moving forward. So there's definitely more work to do. 6 days is more than we've ever had, though. So that to me feels like a gift, and we're grateful for that time. But I do think that that you're right. There's a lot of teaching and learning, and there's a lot of work to be done in that 6-day time. And there's a lot of work and learning to be done as we move forward. I think that we did a lot in the spring as we were going through remote learning. And I think that a lot of what we learned in the spring will come to play now in the fall, and we can start in a stronger place than where we started in the spring, which is a good thing. But I do agree that we have more learning to do, and we're going to continue to do that work together.
Bob, could you just speak a little bit about if the school does not open in person, either 100% offering or the hybrid? Because I think there's some confusion in the community about why couldn't we just start distance learning? Could you explain the process with the state? Because I know that on the news last night, they talked about New Haven voting. So it would be really helpful for people to understand that process, I think.
Sure. So just again, I think we all know that there's a low, moderate, and actually I'm forgetting the other one actually, and high transmission rate graph that talks about what is the county facing in terms of transmissions. So the bottom line here is that when New Haven voted to do that, they really voted to approve their superintendent, I guess, to go ahead and petition the state for a waiver. Okay. Now, I don't know if the state's going to grant them the waiver. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. Right now, New Haven is similar to us in that they're in the low transmission category. So there has to be some extenuating circumstances that that the Commissioner of Education, the State Board of Education, and the local health department would agree together. Yes, we will allow you to do remote learning. Again, it goes back to that part on the slide where I said that the flexibility that the state gave right now is, even though we're in low transmission, districts can, low transmission would usually equal out to automatically, let's invite everybody back who wants to come back. But they're allowing the flexibility between full in-person and hybrid, given these low transmission rates, but not just to go to this. We cannot make just a decision here at the board level. We're going to do it and it's over with. We have to petition the state. They have to grant it. Otherwise, and I don't know, it'll be interesting to see what New Haven's reasons are in terms of how they present it and what the outcome will be. Does that answer your question, Lynn, or not?
Yeah, I think so. I think that the community might be confused about that would have to go to petition to the state. And listening to the commissioner today when he spoke during the governor's press conference, it sounded like the commissioner was really supporting having kids back in the school. So I'll be interested to see what happens with New Haven's petition as well. But I wanted the community to understand that it wasn't just a decision we could make solely on our own, or that the administration could make solely on its own.
Right. And listen, I'll just make a little add addition to that, if you don't mind, and that is that, so they're talking about needing more time. So time is a factor for every district. And certainly, you know, there could be other factors as well. You know, our mitigating strategies might, all of a sudden, we might realize they're not what they should be. Or let's say we have a major staffing problem. Okay, so I think those are the kinds of things that New Haven probably underlying the whole idea of time for them is probably part of that as well. So anyway.
Thank you. Cheryl, do you have anything you wanted to add?
I was just going to ask, I know Vito and Al are not here. You have up in the chat about the outdoor classroom. That was really the area that they're exploring, that it's up to the teacher's discretion. It's not going to be all day that someone is outside, but just to clarify that if a teacher wanted to take a group outside when it made sense for the lesson, that they could go outside. I don't know if Lisa or Doreen want to clarify any of that, but I know Al and Vito, that was kind of their direction, but that's a brief overview of that.
Thank you, Cheryl.
I'm
Jeff?
on the outdoor committee. I can speak a little bit to it if that's helpful.
You can, Joyce, and then we'll go to Jeff Townsend after you.
Okay, there was a subcommittee that was formed and headed by Vito and Al, who had a bunch of parents, including Sherry Storyguard and Sandy Stein, among others, joined the committee. And the way that we were thinking about it is very flexibly. So we're right now in the process of soliciting feedback from the teachers about how they might use the outdoor space, but we're really leaving it to the teachers as to how they want to use the outdoor space, because there are some that are going to really embrace that aspect, and there are others that might be a little bit more hesitant. But the idea would be in the next few weeks to kind of solidify where, how people want to use the space, and then go out and buy some equipment and set it up. So that's where we are.
Can I just mention? Oh, actually, I'm sorry. Jeff was going, and then I'll go ahead and add on.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yes. Well, my question is for Bob. I heard you say that you thought it was best to just simply ask people yes or no. Do they want their kids to be in person or do you want them to be remote learning? And I'm just curious why you don't want more nuanced information from parents in the survey.
So I think, so in all honesty, again, this has come to a consultation with other districts and how surveys have worked or not worked well, and trying to be just right to the point. We actually need to plan. We need to know who is coming to the building and who is opting not to come to the building because they want the remote learning option. And we don't want to cloud that with anything else. And that has happened in other places. We're trying to be incredibly clear about that because we have an enormous planning task ahead of us in terms of making sure the numbers and the matrix works for the number of students here and the number of students who are at home.
So I just have to comment that, as was noted in the presentations you gave, parents are going to have flexibility, right? You said there's, a week's notice, which is actually quite minimal. I think it's very hard to make these changes on the fly. So if parents are going to have flexibility, then anything they say now is not going to be locked in stone anyway. So it's hard for me to believe it saves. I don't understand why you wouldn't want more nuanced information from parents about their flexibility with regard to in-person or remote learning.
So again, I guess that's going back to your question, wanting to know if they would be willing to be flexible. Is that what you're saying? Maybe you can send me the question that you're referring to, the actual question, because I believe that I believe most parents probably know in their hearts, based upon their work schedule or based upon what they believe about the pandemic, that they have a commitment for the most part. We recognize that there will be change. It's not going to be easy. We recognize and we will have to be flexible, just like someone who is going to withdraw their child on a moment's notice, or the parents who show up at the door one day and say, I'm enrolling, I just moved to town. And again, I'm not basing this in isolation or in a silo. I'm looking at this from the perspective of other districts and how they have approached this point in the time where we need to be able to we are in the thrust of the nitty-gritty part of the planning of this right now.
So from the plan that I saw, the last slide that Lisa presented gave the first inkling of exactly how we're going to do the remote learning option for the full in-person start that is planned currently. And in that implementation, there are going to be some teachers who are going to be doing the remote learning aspect, and there are going to be some teachers who are going to be doing the in-person aspect.
Correct.
And from that division, the challenge that I foresee is that if you have withdrawals or changes in student population, and let me couch this by saying it's very unlikely we're going to have a very stable COVID epidemic. And under an unstable COVID epidemic, anyone who has sort of a logical conception of like their risk is going to be changing their opinion about whether they want their students in school or not. So it seems very important for us to have a plan that will work flexibly with parents with regard to their particular concerns about their students, rather than a plan that fixes in stone right now, which is a month before school starts practically, and who knows what's going to happen then, exactly what their student is going to be doing in the school year.
So, and I do believe that asking people on August 10th or 11th to make that, I'll use that word, commitment or decision, I do expect that there will be a number of parents who might change that 1 week later, perhaps. I don't think there'll be a lot, but I think there would be some, and we would obviously have to honor that and take that into account. But I think the vast majority are going to know what they want to do at this point in time. They've thought about it. They know enough information. They'll never have enough information, but I believe that they probably know.
Perhaps you'd be willing to put a question on the survey that would, in addition to asking whether they plan, yes or no, very simple, direct question, have their kids be online or in direct in-person learning, perhaps you would, in addition, have another question that gives some sort of quantitative indication of how likely they might be to be concerned about the level their student attending the school or not. I think that kind of quantitative information could be incredibly useful for you in your planning to enable you to understand how things might change as the time progresses throughout this epidemic.
I do think that we're thinking about the survey a little bit differently. And Bob, I apologize if I'm speaking out of turn here, but I mean, I will tell you as the building principal, I need to know who is walking into my building in 3.5 weeks. Like, that's what I need to know right now, because I need to make plans for those kids, for those teachers, for specials, for lunches, for like, I'm in that level right now where that's what I need to know. On August 31st, are you putting your kid in school or not? And I know that between now and August 31st, people can change their minds. Like, I totally get that. And things may even change for the state between now and August 31st. But in terms of like right now on August 10th, what are you thinking? Tell me what you're thinking. I need the nitty gritty. I don't need to know the nuances right now. What I need to know right now is, are you coming or not coming? So I kind of feel like we're thinking about this survey not as a way to I think the survey we did before was more sort of what you're thinking about. And I feel like the survey we're doing now is to really get into the weeds of, are you, how many numbers, how many kids, how many students in each classroom, how many desks, how far apart are those desks? Like, we're kind of at that place now, I think. And I guess that's in my head how I'm thinking about this survey. I need the hard, concrete, yes and no, this is where I am right now information.
So maybe calling it a survey is part of the problem. Maybe we called it more of like an enrollment, right? Because that's what you're really looking for. You're looking for people to enroll their children in one option. And then if they're going to change that, then they need to give 1 week's notice. And I think that this idea of a survey is gathering data, and this idea of an enrollment is a commitment. I just throwing that out there.
Right. And I also have to say, like, I think everybody would at some point or another say that they could change their mind. You know, I mean, I am a parent of 2 children also, obviously, and I have no idea what's going to happen with my family or my nieces or like whoever my kids come into contact with. And so, like, I can make a decision right now for my children, but I also know full well that if something happens, then that's going to change. It doesn't matter. Do you know what I'm trying to say? It's going to change for everybody based on their own unique individual situations. So,
Joyce?
I think one of the biggest challenges that we have in trying to staff both tracks is just making sure that we have enough teachers that are going to be teaching the in-person. Quite honestly, just hearing all the feedback from the teachers. And so I think it would be helpful to understand people's flexibility so that we can then prioritize, because there are buckets of kids, at least in my mind, I don't know if other people share this view, but there are buckets of kids that would be high on the priority list. I would just give a few examples, like the special ed kids, the maybe younger kids that are much more dependent learners, so on and so forth. And so if we're trying to get the numbers to match, I think it might be very helpful for us for planning purposes to see where people fall on the spectrum of flexibility, so that if we need a family to be in distance learning, for example, we could kind of push them there. Does that make sense?
So what I hear members of the board saying again is that the idea of considering a question that would ask parents flexibility, regardless of whether they have a strong opinion or not of where they want their child to be, about their willingness to be flexible with that. Is that what I'm hearing, Joyce?
Yeah, I think it might be very helpful for planning purposes as we're trying to match the numbers, because we might need some families to actually move into distance learning just to kind of align the numbers. That would be my guess.
Okay.
Are there any other board comments or questions?
I know that we're under